All right, let's do part 2 of this exercise. This is quite similar, except we're adding a few new features to the mix. So if we look at the word set that we have to choose from here, it includes some affricates, like in chafe or fetch or so on and so forth, so like cha or huge. So we're going to expect to see some stop fricative combinations for those. And then, or like in a word like six, that sort of thing. And then we're also looking at some glides, like in a word like yes, because of yod, huge, will have a ya in it. With or wife begin with a wa. So we're going to have to take a look and try to figure out what those look like in a spectrogram, although we kind of know what to expect, right? Yeah, so maybe I'll just leave our sort of option set up here. I'll look at the sound files over here so we don't kind of have to switch back and forth on the PDF. Yeah, so here's sound A, and hopefully we've got confidence for this by now, but we've got two sibilant fricatives. They both look like they're probably S's, right, with that high cutoff frequency. And what's going on in the middle here, we've got, this might not be easy to see, but we've got two formants kind of squashed together here. This is where looking at these formant transitions can be useful because you can kind of see them split apart here at the beginning and then coming together into what looks like one gigantic formant. But if we turn on formant tracking, yeah, even prod gets fooled, so maybe it's easier to see it as a human being. But here's our F1, about 655 hertz, so it's high. Here's our F2, it's low, it's about 1,000 hertz. Low or high F1, low F2 is going to put us in the low back corner of the vowel space. This is probably a vowel like ah. I think I rounded a little bit, so it's probably sauce, because we have S's at the beginning, right? So this actually doesn't include any of our new features, but that's okay because we're just kind of walking into the exercise. What do we get for spectrogram B? That one was easy. Hopefully this one will be a little bit harder, and maybe it is. So here we have what looks like a non-sibilant fricative at the beginning. We see kind of this formant pattern at the beginning that lines up well with the formants in the vowels. This is probably an H. We have what looks like sibilant frication here at the tail end with a low cutoff frequency. So that's probably an esh. However, we get something new here. So here's our vowel. And what we haven't seen before is this kind of blank spot here in the middle. And that's a stop, right? So we're just stopping air from flowing out of the mouth by closing the vocal tract in some fashion. And that just gives us a brief amount of silence in the middle of the word. And then it ends with this release burst for the stop. So a stop fricative combination is going to be a fricative, right? And since this ends in a sh, we don't need to think too hard about this because it's probably, if it's a fricative, it's ch, a T followed by a sh. Now we'll just play the T part. You can hear those release bursts, I think, at the tail end. They kind of go by quickly, but if we have the whole thing here, you can hear that ch quality. Yeah, so we have an H at the beginning. We have a ch at the end. Probably don't need to look that hard at the vowel to identify that as a
hitch.
And that's the word hitch. Yeah, so there's lots of clues here. We don't simply have to rely on just the formant frequencies of the vowels anymore, which is nice because they can be hard to decipher sometimes. We've got something different here in this one. I'll start with what we know. So at the tail end, we have another sibilant. Looks like it has a high cutoff frequency here. A little unstable here, so maybe move, I think, forward. Yeah, so this is probably an S or alveolar fricative at the tail end. And we have this vowel here before it, which kind of gets to a point where we have kind of a highish F1 and a lowish, or kind of centralish F2. So who knows, that might be another sort of type vowel. But before that, we get an interesting pattern in what F1 and F2 are doing. So F1 goes down here, or it starts low, and F2 starts out high. And you can also see it's kind of faded out and it kind of fades in. You can read that up here in the sort of waveform track as well. We get this nice sort of smooth ramping up. It looks like you're going from faded out gray to darker gray as we get into the vowel here. But the pattern, so basically that means what we have here is a glide. It's an approximate. We're closing off the vocal tract a little bit more than we would for a vowel, so that means there's less amplitude, less intensity coming out. And so what happens there is that the way to identify which glide it is by trying to figure out what the formant frequencies are doing. And if F1 is low and F2 is high, that corresponds to like an E type vowel. F1 is low, that means we have a high vowel. F2 is high, that means we have a front vowel. So a high front vowel is like E. That corresponds to yod as a glide. So we have basically yod to to S. Yes. And I say it a little bit funnily because I don't want to go into creaky voice. Yeah, you can see how flat my F0 contour is there, and a little bit higher than normal too, 130 hertz. Anyways, that's the word yes. But that's another feature we now know how to identify. So that's good. That was C, right? Yeah. So let's do D. Okay, and what do we got here? So start off with the frication part of this. We got a non-sibilant fricative here at the end. Looks like maybe it could be a little bit voiced, but probably not. We've got this sort of interesting formant transition at the beginning, which leads into this vowel here, which gives us kind of a lowish F1 to a highish F2. This might be something like A. Probably not based on what we've seen before. But what's really informative here is that this is another sort of approximant at the beginning, or a glide. We can kind of see that fading in part from the beginning where it's less intense at the start, but then it kind of smoothly ramps up. We also see that in the waveform. I know you didn't get a chance to look at the waveforms in the exercise, but it's still there in case you ever get a chance to look at these again. And what happens here, we can see F1 and F2 kind of coming together here at the beginning. So they're both kind of going down into that approximate. So yeah, that is a good sign that if F1 and F2 are low, then we're in the high back region of the space. The vowel we expect to find there is an oo. The corresponding glide would be a wa, right? So this is a wa. We have a non-sibilant fricative here at the tail end. I'm going to change my mind a little bit about this vowel because it's relatively steady state, but it's a lowish F1, highish F2. It's probably the vowel I. It doesn't really look like an A because it's not super long and it's not kind of changing in the middle. It's not sort of high in front enough to be an E, but it's probably this one, number 11, with.
Wife.
No, I'm wrong. Steve, what's wrong with you? I got to edit this out now. Never mind. I'll just own up to my mistakes and say that I'm doing this quickly. And the part of this that I missed is the ah part. So I ends in an I, like that. But like I said, it's hard to tell these non-sibilant fricatives apart. So this is an F, not an ith, a theta. And it would probably help if I did the whole exercise first, but this is the ah part. Actually, for me, it's more, because it's raised, it's more of a schwa part. So I apologize for that, but at least we got the first part of that right, because it's a what. Okay, so right, better than 2 out of 3, 11 out of 12. 11 out of 12 ain't bad. Let's try to do E, crank this exercise up to at least 4 out of 5. Okay, what's going on here? This is a little bit different from what we've seen before, but it looks like it's a sibilant fricative. We get at least a little more intensity here at the low end of this particular fricative. And it's cutting off at a very low frequency, like 2000 hertz, probably another sh, which is what it is. And we can also see we have this sort of glide entree into this one again. So it's kind of faded out here a little bit, but then it ramps up to more intensity as we get into the vowel. And then what is this vowel? It's a high F1 and it's a low F2. They're kind of glommed together there, crammed together there. So it's probably an ah type vowel. And this is, since both F1 and F2 go down into the glide, it's probably a wa. It's probably a wa, followed by an ah, followed by an esh, which gives us wash.
Wash.
Yeah. Number 9. I'm actually a little bit curious, just for independent reasons, to compare this to my vowel and sauce, to hear how different they sound. Versus. Yeah, they're pretty similar. So it's a low back vowel, but you can see that by F1 and F2 coming together. All right, what do we got for F? Okay, we've got 2 sibilant fricatives, one at the beginning, one at the tail end. both of them look like S's because the cutoff frequency is high. We also have clearly a stop here in the middle. So we've got a stop followed by a fricative, which is S. So we're not dealing with the affricate ch there anymore. We've got a different sort of stop fricative combination going on. And we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves with this, but I can see pretty clearly what stop that is, because if we look at the vowel, don't worry about sort of the center formant frequency so much as what happens at the tail end. You can see F2 and F3 coming together. And that means we have a K here. That's what is called the velar pinch, F2 and F3 coming together. So that clues you into the fact that what follows, the silence that follows, is in the velar place of articulation. And a voiceless velar stop is a K. And you can hear that right there. So this is probably X. And this is an S at the beginning. We've got really only one option for this one. It's that word 6 that I mentioned before.
6.
All right. And here's our I in the middle.
6.
All right. Moving right along, we have G. Let's see. So we've got two non-sibilant fricatives here, one at the beginning and one at the end. Or maybe we've got more than one non-sibilant fricative here at the tail end. Maybe you can see this. This is super subtle and you might not notice unless you knew what you were looking for. But there's kind of a change in quality of the turbulence here between this guy and that part of the end. So maybe we have two different non-sibilant fricatives there. And then we've got this sort of nondescript vowel in the middle, which is maybe a lowish F1, maybe a highish F2. So maybe a little bit of a high, a little bit of a front vowel there. But if we look back at our sort of options here, the only one that's really going to fit this bill with non-sibilant fricatives at the beginning and end is this guy, fifth. And I tried to say it the way I said it in the recording too.
Fifth.
But you can kind of see that transition here at the tail end is where you go from f to th. Yeah, and it's nice to get them side by side, so you can see whatever sort of differences might exist between those two fricatives. Acoustic differences might exist between them. They're not really easy to pin down, although it's pretty easy to see that they're both kind of the same type in terms of being non-sibilants. Don't want to dwell on that too much, though, because you can go crazy trying to differentiate between an F and a theta. So I do not want you to go insane, at least not before the final. What you do over the summer is your own time. What we've got here in H is a non-sibilant fricative at the tail end. We've got a sibilant fricative here at the beginning. But we've also got something interesting here. We've got these two little spikes. So what's going on with that? These look like those release bursts we've seen before. We saw them, I think, with, what was the word, hitch? Or one of these where we had, or was it fetch? I can't remember. One of these we had the affricate at the tail end. And we've got a similar pattern here with sort of a sibilant fricative in this spot with a pretty low cutoff frequency, about 2300 hertz. So it's probably a sh. And this is what looks like some stop release bursts right before it. So we're probably starting out with a ch here. I don't know how many options we've got here for that, but probably a word like chafe would fit the bill pretty well. We've got the non-sibilant fricative at the tail end. And we've got, looks kind of like an A here in the middle, lowish F1. Kind of see that diphthong, not too much for the A in the middle.
A.
But this is chafe.
Chafe.
And I'll mention, you get more of the sibilants here at the beginning of this affricate. It looks like I go into a little portion here where it's almost like an aspirated affricate. Like a huh at the tail end. Chafe. Just kind of speaking breathlessly there almost. But yeah, that's more useful for other languages besides English. But affricates can be aspirated as well. And maybe some speakers of English, aspirate their affricates too. What do we got here for I? Just a few more to go. This is a couple patterns we've seen before. Non-sibilant fricative. Doesn't look like it's H because it doesn't have formants. We've got a sibilant fricative here at the tail end, low cutoff frequency, and we've got kind of a stop right before it with a release burst at the tail end. So right off the bat, we know that we have a ch affricate at the tail end to begin with, and a limited number of options to deal with at the start here. I think we already did hitch. This one, a good option might be, say, like fetch. We can take a look at the vowel, see what it's doing. So it's a midish vowel, centralish, F2 vowel, so it's not that far away from like a schwa. I get a little creaky voice here at the tail end. But this is probably an here in the middle.
Bet.
And this is fetch.
Fetch.
Yeah, so
Bet.
can often be pretty close to a schwa when you actually look at it in an acoustic recording. In terms of its vowel frequencies, they look like they're fairly evenly spaced. If you think about that in terms of the vowel space, is pretty close to schwa anyways. If these were perfectly evenly spaced, that'd be a nice example of schwa. It's not quite there, but
fetch.
Close enough for me to make the point. All right, J. Oh, this is exciting. At least for me. So we look like we have a non-sibilant fricative here at the tail end. And we have what's clearly a glide here at the beginning. I think this is one I suspected we had before, but didn't. And then we have what looks like kind of a high frontish vowel here at the end, because F1's a little bit lower than 500 and F2 is a little bit higher than 1500. This is probably the I was looking for before. And here, this nice transition out of this glide where F2 rises dramatically. That's the wi part of this. With. Yep. Yep. So we can compare that. Where was our wife? She's downstairs taking care of the baby, but we can compare those two here to see how they look different. And as you can see, they're fairly similar, but not quite the same. And one of the differences is that there is sort of a longer transition for the wife versus the with. Again, these are going to be confusing at the tail end. So you can't get a whole lot of information out of that. It's more sort of this transition here at the beginning. And just so that nothing I say gets misinterpreted, my wife is a professional market researcher. She does more than just take care of the child. So don't interpret anything too harsh out of that. We share our duties as mother and father. All right, where was I before I potentially got myself into trouble? There's our with. And she's gracious enough to let me do this now for everybody's benefit, hopefully. All right, what are we doing here for K? We've got what look like two different sibilant fricatives at the beginning and end, but I'll say more about that in a second. This one shows a pattern we've seen before as well. So this is a sibilant at the tail end. With a low cutoff frequency, so it's probably a post-alveolar fricative. However, we get a clue here at the right before it, in that we have what looks like a voiced stop. So there's some silence here at the high end of the frequency scale in the spectrogram, and then we get some voicing down here at the bottom. So that's probably a voiced stop, followed by a fricative. The fricative itself doesn't look to be too voiced. I'll just play it. I don't think you can hear too much voicing in there. Maybe I can include a little bit of it. It still doesn't sound that voiced. But if we go back to our options, we do have this one option which kind of helps us out. That huge is the only one that ends in sort of a stop fricative combination that's at least nominally voiced. Maybe we can hear that j better if we play the stop too. And you can hear hopefully that low frequency part for the stop. That part. That's my j. So if I was transcribing this very, very narrowly, this would be a d in terms of its symbol, followed by an esh symbol for this. At least that's how I'm doing it phonetically. But phonemically, it's the j affricate. And this looks like a sibilant fricative, but it turns out it's not. But at least not, again, phonemically. Phonetically, it's doing something interesting. This is probably a palatal fricative. And I think you can hear that. So it's not really a true H because it's followed by the y of huge. Huge. Yeah, it's me saying it like Donald Trump. Huge. Maybe. I'll cut it off even more. Huge. Maybe not like Donald Trump at all, but what I get out of this is the H moves forward there's more of a constriction in the palatal place of articulation because there's a palatal fricative occurring right after it. So that's, and that looks more like a sibilant because I'm still getting that sort of obstacle turbulence at the back of my upper row of teeth. Similar to what we get for a sh, but just further back, right? Huge.
Huge.
Yeah, that's what that one looks like. And last but not least, we have L. We can figure this out from process of elimination, but let's do it the hard way for educational purposes. But here's a non-sibilant fricative again. Here's a sibilant fricative with a relatively high cutoff frequency, so it's probably an S. This is who knows what at the tail end, but it's maybe a labiodental or interdental. And then we have this vowel in the middle, which looks like an ah type vowel because F1 is high, F2 is low. And we can kind of see also this transition at the beginning where it kind of fades in again. So this looks like a glide or approximate with two low formant frequencies. F1 and F2 are both low. It's probably a what? This is probably swath, something like that. Swath. All right. And that one hopefully makes sense by now. Because once you see the cues, once you recognize the patterns, it should be relatively straightforward to identify. Okay, I'm going to do the fricative sentence in the separate video here at the tail end. Yeah, I hope you got something out of this as well. But the sentence is nice because after doing a whole bunch of individual words, it turns out we can actually look at entire utterances. Okay, so we'll see how to do that here in a second. See you then.